welcome to Fast Track, brought to you by Aera, the podcast where we help you get into your first home faster. I'm Chereè Kinnear with Aera founder Derek Handley. In this episode, we chat about the dynamics of co-buying your first home, whether that's with a partner, friend or family member, and what you're entitled to if things go south. But first of all, let's take a look at some of the top stories. So this first headline is great for those who are wanting to buy their first home alone, or even if they are buying with a partner but want to increase their borrowing power. So several major banks like Westpac, ANZ and ASB have relaxed their policies on considering flatmate income when assessing mortgage applications. So now, Derek, borrowers are actually able to just submit a letter of intent rather than needing a signed letter from a potential boarder or a flatmate to say, like, yes, I'm going to move in with this person. So how beneficial is this for first-home buyers?
So I think it's good optics, it's good communication that the banks want people to know this. But if you're working with someone like Aera, you already know this because we make this a key part of us helping you figure out how you're going to get into the first home. And a lot of people we work with, particularly single people, they need to rely on this flatmate or boarder additional income in order to get the mortgage that they need to buy the house. So first of all, most people didn't even know that you can include it. So you go to a mortgage calculator on the website of any bank, it's not going to tell you, oh, and if you had a boarder, you'll be able to borrow another 80 or 100,000. And secondly, yes, the intention at the moment is you don't need to secure the boarder before you've got the apartment or house. You just need to commit that you are going to get one. And this is really helpful to so many different people. And it doesn't just have to be a single. It could be a couple who takes one bedroom and then gets the second bedroom rented out and is able to afford another $100,000 on the house, which for most people will make all the difference.
And I think I actually read in the story, it said one flatmate could get you almost up to $150,000. Obviously, two would be $300,000, which is a huge amount.
Yeah.
And we actually know someone as well, a friend who has the deposit there, but is struggling with having enough income to be able to have more borrowing power if they wish to buy in a place like Auckland, around $650,000, $700,000+ for a home. You'd need quite a bit as a single person to qualify for that. So this would be a huge, difference.
I don't know if it will get up to that high in terms of the 300. I think the media article is probably more inflated to what we think's possible. Mm-hmm. But whatever it is, it will make the difference for a lot of people.
Yeah, and it can really open the possibility of, what you could do possibly earlier in your life rather than needing to wait till, especially again, if you're a single person and you don't want to have to wait till you have a partner you're willing to buy with, you can get into market.
Yeah, and the thing is that when you get in there and you do have a boarder and a flatmate or whatever it might be, and then you find that you've got a new job or you're paid a bit more and you don't want them there anymore, as long as you're continuing to pay the mortgages, you don't need to have them, throughout the whole lifetime of the mortgage. It's just that it gets you in at the beginning. And if your circumstances change, as long as you're still paying the mortgage, you should be fine.
So we move now to some news out of Canterbury, where the number of new homes being built is increasing as more people look to buy in the region. So they currently have the second highest number of new dwellings being built relative to the size of its population. And what's really interesting here is the number of freestanding homes constructed in the year to March was 3,700, up almost 9% on the previous year. And now we went to Christchurch not that long ago with our first home finder, Matt, and we got to go through some home tours. And what really stood out, I think, to all of us was what you can actually buy in Canterbury for the same price as what you'd be able to buy in other cities like Auckland. And those freestanding houses are a big tick for first-home buyers.
Totally. Canterbury is, I think, an amazing place for first-home buyers because you still get something, a lot of Kiwis would consider in their minds as being a first home, and it's really good value.
They're really nice houses. And I thought a lot of the time I looked at those developments like in areas like Hallswell, and I thought this is it's a first home essentially within the price bracket of a starter home, but I was like, this is kind of like almost at the dream home vibe. So you can see why so many more people are actually starting to look at moving down there.
Yeah, and there's also lots of interesting townhouse type developments in the city centre itself. So it's not just the ones that, are on a plot of land. There's interesting character homes and other developments that are happening in the city that look different and are more interesting than what's being built in Auckland as well.
Do you think that you'd encourage more people who live outside of that region to actually look at considering that as an option for a first home?
I think a lot of people from Auckland should be considering Christchurch from Canterbury if they would consider a move in general. It seems to be a great place that can kind of meet a lot of needs. It's obviously quite difficult to up sticks and move entirely, but if you have a career that can move, then it's something you probably should consider.
And it's still a major city. Like a lot of people are like, you don't want to move out of Auckland or wherever and move to a small town where you can't get work or whatever. But, you know,
No,
you
it's a
go
great
down.
city.
Yeah,
There's lots of cool
exactly.
stuff
There's
going
a
on
lot
there.
of work and
it's very
opportunity.
beautiful. But I have to say, one of the funny things is, in some of the clips where we talk about what you can get in Canterbury, local Cantabrians complain about how small the houses are and how small the land is. And it just shows you the psychology continues up and down the country, where people are just constantly willing to complain about what's bad with something versus like, wow, that's something someone can get as their first home. So if you had an Aucklander going down to there and seeing those houses, they would not believe it. They'd be like, this is incredible. But you still have locals going, oh, that's shit. It's so small. It's so tiny. All the houses are so close together. So you can't ever please everyone.
Yeah, it's actually quite mind-blowing because, like you said, you go down there and you're like, oh, you actually get a little bit of a yard and some garden space. You get a garage.
I know,
Which a lot of first homes you're going to have
all
to.
on one level.
Yeah, exactly, which is awesome. But I guess another key part tying into some recent news coming out of that region is, I guess, if you do want to look at moving down there, maybe act soon, because prices obviously are going up and it's one of the fastest growing regions for house prices because of that very reason.
Yes, when you look at the house price kind of story at the moment, it's quite muddy because people are releasing news on the year-on-year prices, which are still flat or in some places down. And also it's different region by region. So some regions are actually, when you look at the last 3 months in Canterbury, which is something just under 2%, that's actually a really high growth rate. That's on average, annualized, it'd be somewhere between 6 to 8%, which is a lot. And in other places, it might be flat or slightly down. So it's a mixed story. I think it's because there are different parts of the country that are recovering at different rates in the economy, in the economic cycle, and maybe also, just as you've mentioned, different types of demand characteristics for these kinds of homes. So Christchurch is starting to move, which is maybe an indicator of, the rest of the country following next year. I don't really want any of those regions to go much faster than what Christchurch is doing. We don't want to get into a situation like what we had, in the COVID period.
Our next topic focuses on co-buying. So whether that's with a partner, which is probably the more traditional way, but also we see a lot of people buying with a friend or even a family member. And it has become an increasingly popular strategy to enter the property market because for a lot of people, it obviously not only increases your borrowing power, also can add a huge chunk of a deposit there if you're accessing 2 different Kiwi savers, for instance, and helps people get into the first home a lot quicker too. We also see now, I think, if we look at our parents' generation, was maybe more traditional to get married, buy the house, where nowadays people are being able to buy maybe a bit earlier or actually decide to buy the first home instead of having the wedding first from a financial perspective. But while it offers its benefits, it does obviously introduce a few complexities as well, especially when things maybe don't work out the way that you hope that they do. To start off with getting at the beginning of the house buying process, when it comes to getting approved and buying the home, how does co-ownership differ in terms of like the process for people?
So there's a few key pieces, but the start of it is when they are combining their finances. So you're preparing to get a mortgage and you need to combine, as you said, the incomes and the savings or the deposits of both parties. So the income is what will determine collectively what the bank will lend you, putting 2 incomes together. And then the Kiwi savers and savings will determine the deposit, which will also have an impact on how much they're willing to borrow. So some people might have no savings, and then the other person's providing the savings. And so then you're kind of using one person's saving and you're combining the income to get the lending. And it might be the other way around. Someone might have a really big deposit, but they might be low on their income and they might be older, for example. They've been saving for longer. And so the other person is kind of compensating for the income. So at Aera, we have a few situations where it's a mother and a son or something like that. So the mother is older, they have more in their Kiwi saver, their income is relatively modest, and the younger person is earning more but doesn't have much saving. You kind of put the 2 together. So those are the key pieces of the puzzle you need to produce in order to figure out what they can buy. The second thing is that they will have different credit scores. And so you need to make sure their credit scores are okay as a combination, as a unit. And that's no different from a married couple or something. You both have to have good credit scores. So if one of those 2 partners have a very bad credit score, it's probably going to torpedo the deal. So you first get this picture, what can we borrow as a unit if we're going to do this together? The second piece then is, okay, how is this going to work? Who's going to own how much? And then if we unwind it, how's it going to work? And over the period throughout the ownership, who's going to contribute each piece? And that's the more kind of, nuanced stuff that needs to be sorted out and put into legal documents.
I want to address a couple of myths around co-ownership. Is it true that it's easier for a married couple to buy and get approved to be able to buy a home than it is for two people, whether they're friends or family members?
Well, it's definitely much more seamless because it's like one couple who are acting as a unit, and there's going to be one ownership kind of structure, and you're dealing with a very simple like legal arrangement of who owns the house generally, versus having to have this more complex scenario of who's contributing what and then how are they going to unwind it. But in terms of the finances, it shouldn't, it might be a little bit more complicated to produce a pre-approval document for the bank, but in the end, they're going to look at the same things: the creditworthiness, the deposit, and the potential borrowing power. One other thing, which again might be the same thing in a couple, is age difference. So if you talk about that example from before, your parent is buying it with you, your parent's probably 20 plus years older than you. There are going to be situations where the bank will say, well, this person is much closer to retirement, and so we can't rely on them as an income stream in 25 years, et cetera, and we might not be able to create the same kind of weekly repayment structure. So there's little nuances depending on who's involved in the co-ownership.
I guess what I understand from that too is that obviously when you're married, the legal aspect, a lot of it's kind of tied up nicely within that. But what about a couple that have been together for a number of years? They've decided, we want to buy the house and then have a wedding later in life. Obviously, they're now considered de facto. Was it a couple years living together?
I think it's 3 at the moment.
What
in New
are the
Zealand,
legal things around that?
You'd probably want. I'm sure the lawyers would advise such a couple, but you'd need to again carry out this kind of exercise of who's going to end up with what and who's going to contribute what, and how is it relationship property versus someone's individual property, and that might be complicated by someone already having some assets. Maybe already they've got another house, for example. So all these things are something that a lawyer would have to advise on, but it's really working through the nuances of the financials of it and the ownership, who owns what and how they're going to end up with their parts of it if they break up, which is a scenario that everyone needs to kind of organize themselves with, if it's a couple or if it's a brother and sister or if it's, parent and son. I'm not meaning break up in terms of, they're never not going to be brothers and sisters, but they don't want to own the house anymore together.
Mm-hmm. I think that's an interesting one too in terms of what if things do go south? What if things get kind of messy? What if, you get family members even that just turn on each other. Friendship's probably more likely something goes wrong within a friendship or a relationship even. Like what if something goes really badly in that relationship and people want to screw someone over or, it can get quite messy.
I think it could, and that's why having those legal documents and I guess agreements in place is really key. But, like in a lot of things and like in business in particular, the legal stuff is always the last resort, right? You're trying to get a buy in life based on values and relationships. And so going into buying a house with someone should start with a point of values, not money. It's like, do we believe we're a great partnership? Do we believe in the same things? Do we think we should treat this house the same way? How do we think we want to upkeep it or renovate it or furnish it? And if you're not on the same page on all those things, then there's no point in going down the legal route because you actually are not even aligned from a values perspective. So for me, I think you would start there and then end up with how do you contractually protect this?
A comment I saw on our socials recently, which I think is really relevant to this, someone commented, without, I guess, a lot of context, so it's kind of hard to know exactly, but she said that, I wish that I could draw from my KiwiSaver again because I was married, bought a house, used my KiwiSaver, had a divorce, and now a few years later, she's like, now I can't use it anymore. I don't have enough for a deposit on my own. Obviously, we don't know what happened in terms of the split. You'd think that 50-50, and I don't know, maybe they lost value on the house and she ended up losing money. But what would you say to someone in that sort of situation?
So again, at Aera, we have a lot of people who've been in a similar situation working with us, which is they've either been married or they've been de facto and they've had a house before and they used their KiwiSaver and somehow the relationship broke up and the house got sold, something like that. So they either had or didn't have some proceeds from that. But something that maybe a lot of people don't know is that you can access your KiwiSaver again. It's called the second chance or something like the second chance access, where you are in a similar situation that a normal person would look at you and go, they're in a similar situation to a first home buyer, and you would get access to that KiwiSaver again. You need to get permission and you need to get your KiwiSaver to approve it, but it doesn't mean that it's like one and done, like you can never try again.
Which I think people think that is the case because I don't think it's super widely talked about that you can use it again.
Yes, so this is another one of the things when you work with a team that knows what they're doing, they know where all the what stones to turn over. And so a lot of people think, oh, I can't even use my KiwiSaver for a first home because I had one 10 years ago. But if you are in all intents and purposes, in a similar situation as a traditional first home buyer, you can argue your case, and I think in most cases you will be able to.
And you would still encourage anyone to look at co-buying as an option, even if they have maybe concerns about how things could end or when it comes to splitting things. It's still a good move?
I think if you can't find your way on your own to get that income up to a reasonable level, to buy a house in the place that you'd want to be, and at the moment you're talking about 5 times income is what the bank's going to lend you, right? So if you're going to be on your own, you'd want to be in the 70s, 80s, 90,000s to buy something that was even quite, inexpensive, and your deposit isn't yet already in the 6 figures, then you do need to find a way to augment it. So if you can't find your way to get to the income to a 550 or 600K purchase price, then buying with someone else might get you up to the 700s and you can buy something together, right? The other thing that we have spoken about before is I would exhaust all the border options first, right? Can you buy it by having a border or 2 borders, augment the income? Everything is just simpler if you can buy it, yourself. And obviously, when you talk about a couple, I'm talking about if you're in a relationship or you're married, then that seems to me to be a positive thing that you want to do. The things that are more complicated maybe are things that are friends and things that you don't know. You don't want to live in the same house forever, for example, where you know that someone's going to move out at some point, and then what you're going to do is, you've got to come to that bridge when you get to it.
Well, that's a wrap for this episode of Fast Track. If you enjoyed it, send it to a friend or a family member and chuck us a follow on socials, fasttrack_pod. And we'll catch you next time.